right, hello everyone, and welcome to a very special Data Viz Friday. Special for a number of reasons. First of which, as you all hopefully know, it is not Friday; it is a Thursday. And unlike the past Data Viz Fridays, where we talked about a specific data visualization, today we'll be talking about all the visualizations and really the challenge of how do we identify and discover the best visualization to use for your data set. So before we get into that, let me just say hi to our co-hosts here. So we have Noel and Elijah. How are you doing? How is your special Thursday on a Friday treating you?
Hi. Good. This is really my Friday too. I'm off
Nice.
tomorrow, so that's nice.
Outstanding. I should do that too.
I mean, Thursday is the new Friday, right? Wasn't that
Yeah.
a saying from like a
Let's all
decade
do it.
ago?
Decided Notable is doing a 4-day work week, right? Thursdays is Friday. We're done.
Yep.
Perfect.
I think that's a great plan.
Yeah. All right, so we'll kick things over to Elijah here, and we'll hear all about Data Prism, which is the new capability within Notable to, again, help you discover the best visualization to use when you have a data set. So Elijah, please kick things off.
Absolutely, and real happy to see the amount of folks we have in the notebook right now. I can see that there's around 20 people in the notebook, not counting notable folks, which is great. We've got the live stream embedded in the notebook, so you can follow along there. But also, we've got a bunch of examples that I want to walk through. So like Dave was saying, the Data Viz Friday, what we try to do with Data Viz Friday is talk about data visualization. It's not about sort of selling the Notable product. I'm happy to show off Notable as we're talking through different data visualization forms. But this week it's a bit different because we're going to talk about a feature in the Notable product that you're not going to find in too many other products, unfortunately. And that is automatic data visualization or chart suggestion or any other kind of collaboration between the tool and you to develop views into your data. Now, it's not like automatic visualization is something new. Automatic data visualization has been around for a long time and means a lot of different things. Lately, what it means is if you drag a metric into a box, it gives you a bar chart. If you drag two metrics into a box, shock and amazement, it gives you a scatter plot. So that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about something that's more similar to the academic research projects, if you're familiar with them, like Lux, which does automatic data visualization to try to develop insights, or Voyager, which does the same. And then there's Voyager 2. These are products, I believe, out of UW. And Lux, of course, is out of Berkeley with Doris Lee. So it's along those lines of how can we take a data set like this one right here. If you've seen any of the examples for DEX, you are familiar with this data set. It's the World Happiness data set. We've got a lot of things like country names and regions, and then we have the rank, their happiness rank from 1 to 157. And then what do we have? We have the happiness score, and then all of the metrics that were used to define this score. How happy is a country? And normally what we'd do with something like this is we'd go in and we'd build charts from it, right? We'd go and build some bar chart or violin plot or map or whatever. And we've got a lot of charts. There's a lot of charts available in DEX. Counted, I think it was somewhere around 43, 44. But this new feature, Data Prism, what it does instead is it looks at the shape of your data, it looks at the distribution of your data, the kind of categories and dimensions you have, and it tries to suggest charts. And so we can take a look real quick at here, let me close this, get a little bit of a larger view here. And so it's taken that data set, which is a rather wide data set with a number of different metrics, and it's tried to suggest some ways to look at it. So here we see two ways of looking at generosity compared with dystopia residual. We've got a multi-axis bar line chart, and then because generosity and dystopia residual have roughly similar scales, we can see that it's also offering us a dumbbell plot to show how you might see the difference between them. But then it doesn't stop there, right? It shows you things like it's, I guess this is trust, according to region, and showing a box plot with 1.5 IQR outliers, which is a traditional approach with box plots. Tree map, what do we got? We got a radar plot of health, freedom, and family. So we're seeing the shape for health, freedom, and family. So you can see any, you can actually see some dramatic differences for that, the shape in that radar plot. And scatter plot of the same over here. So this is interesting. I always like this kind of aspect of Data Prism, which is this is health, freedom, and family over here as a graduated symbol plot. And this is health, freedom, and family over here as a radar plot. So the same kind of thing that was going on up here with the dumbbell plot and the combined bar chart, showing you the same metrics along the same dimensions, but as two different kinds of charts, which I think is really exciting because we tend to think of charts as being mapped to the number of metrics and dimensions that we want to visualize. When you're coming from a BI tool background, and even when you've gotten sort of accustomed to your process using different libraries, you think, oh, well, I've got two metrics, so therefore it's a scatter plot. Two metrics in a category, it's a scatter plot, and maybe I color the different categories on my scatter plot. But really, two different metrics in a category, depending on the number of categories you have, makes a very good dumbbell plot, makes a very good bar line plot. You might want to map some magnitude on a tree map instead of showing it as a distribution on a box plot. You might want to compare a lot of different radars. This may be too many radars for a radar plot, but still pretty legible, versus a graduated symbol plot. And because Data Prism is relatively smart, so it's smart enough to know when to deploy a dumbbell plot, right? It's also smart enough to see that this has a column that has strings in it that look like country names. And so it said, hey, let's plot some of this data onto a map. And so here we can see GDP per capita mapped onto a choropleth map. And it does some few other things. We've got a metric bar chart here where one of the metrics you can see is very small and one of them is very large. Long tail bar chart. So a long tail bar chart gets deployed when you're looking at very high-end dimensions. So in this case, individual countries. So it's showing you all these individual countries, and then it's showing you the average for the rest of the countries. And then a parallel coordinates display. You'll see parallel coordinates display show up a lot because a parallel coordinates display is a good way of displaying lots of metrics and dimensions. There aren't very many charts that do sort of high dimensionality that great. So something like parallel coordinates is good to catch what you have left. What's nice about Data Prism is that if I want to, I can sort of click on some of these. I can use the filtering capacity of our parallel coordinates chart. You can see that it's popping up a bunch of filters over here. And then as I scroll up, it will reflect those filters in the rest of the charts. Maybe I'll leave that open so the controls don't keep resizing my chart. But you can see that what's happened here is because I filtered it with this parallel coordinates display, all the charts have reflected those filters. Some other things that are nice, we'll look at this in more detail, but if there's a particular chart you like that you want to then work on, you can go sort of zoom into that chart and it'll take up the full display. It'll become a regular, what we call view in Dex, and you can go and adjust it if you want to. So you could look at different kinds of values here. Now this isn't going to change anything to combination mode because there's a one-to-one correspondence between the rows and the choropleth regions. So combination mode is not going to make any difference. But if I wanted to, I could say I didn't really want that. I wanted happiness rank or something else. Automatic data visualization. I don't know what that's about, and I don't care. Probably because I'm not on the VPN or something. Who knows? Automatic data visualization is great for giving you that sort of automatic insight, right? You can jump in to a table. You can just load your data frame. You can hit Data Prism, and you get a bunch of charts that describe the shape of your data, that give you some ideas of how to explore the data and perhaps some insights immediately into the data. But we know, and we know this with ChatGPT, that we'll never sort of replace human beings.
I have a quick question, Elijah.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Noel.
Speaking of ChatGPT, is this using any sort of AI under the hood? What's going on with this that's allowing it to suggest based on our data?
Well, we're not going to reveal all of our secrets, but it doesn't use it doesn't use the large language model approach that ChatGPT does, and it doesn't use some of the sort of more robust machine learning approaches that you've seen in some of the academic projects. Fundamentally, it's a heuristic-based model that has definitions for appropriate charts and then weights based on whether those charts are suitable for different kind of priorities for how a user is for how the data is shaped. And then so it applies the charts that are valid, and it prioritizes the ones that are probably going to make more sense for the kind of data that you're looking at. So there's these viability functions in there that try to identify, for instance, when we talked about the dumbbell chart or the choropleth map, there's some viability functionality that says, hey, does this make sense to be a dumbbell chart? Does this make sense to be a choropleth map? And then there's a bit more going on there. But yeah, we're going to expose more of the controls that are eventually that expose more of sort of the weights, so that you can get different kinds of results. It's real fun if you prioritize different semantic concepts about charts, the different sets of charts you'll get back for the same data set. And so I think that's kind of exciting. But yeah, it's so it's not ChatGPT. You know, we might, as we've integrated ChatGPT into the Notable app for other purposes, we might think about integrating ChatGPT into this stuff.
Awesome. So it's just kind of looking at the shape of your data set and going based off that.
That's right. That's right. It's looking at the distributions of data and the sort of statistical summaries of the data, and trying to identify more than like Python does about sort of data types. So Python only recognizes like date times and integers and numbers and strings. So it tries to understand a bit more than that.
Great.
So we have that fully automatic Data Prism, right? I go to a data set like this one. This is some mortgage data from Canada. I go to Data Prism and it'll go fully automatic and it'll give me a bunch of views into the data set. And I think that's great, because actually this gives back really good, interesting automatic views. But like I was saying, we can't replace the domain expert, and we wouldn't want to replace the domain expert. Anybody who thinks that ChatGPT is going to replace all of these experts, I don't agree with that. And I don't think that a tool like this is going to or should be designed to replace expertise. Instead, it's meant to supplement it. It's meant to provide you in these automatic views with interesting approaches, insights into your data, and raw material for you to use to develop the right visual displays of information. So to that end, what we've done is along with this fully automatic view, we have this priority metrics and dimensions control that allows me to specify from this data set particular metrics and dimensions that I think are important. And so if I specify in this case, say, geography, delinquency rate, and average mortgage amount, you can see the results it gave me when it was just looking at the whole data set. If I look at just these three, you'll notice that it comes back with fewer results, but those results are all focused on those three metrics and dimensions. And as a result, I can actually get into some pretty interesting, immediately, insights, right? Like I thought, these are what are interesting to me. Then you can see in this combined bar chart that there is a very different correlation between the delinquency rate and the average mortgage amount, depending on region. You can see some very distinct clustering over in the scatter plot. The metric bar chart, not so great, because these are so out of scale from each other. And then parallel coordinates, again, gives me some functionality that I could very quickly filter. Sometimes you'll see some very strong patterns in parallel coordinates, and sometimes parallel coordinates is useful just so you can say, oh, well, just show me the top end of the delinquency rate. And then suddenly I can go back up here and say, oh, if we're just looking at the top delinquency rate, there's a very different pattern here. And so that's the purpose of Data Prism's prioritized metrics and dimensions, because again, that initial view is useful, but it's useful for certain things, and then we have this prioritization that's useful for other approaches, for that approach where you can bring that domain expertise into the model in a way that what we refer to as sort of the human in the middle machine learning, right? Where you're helping it to understand the data set, and the two of you are sort of working together to make better views. So what do we do with something with a tool like Data Prism? I mean, already I think you can see the value of jumping into a data set and just getting this kind of overview of the data set. The idea that we have in mind with this tool, though, is that along with sort of building, along with providing these overviews, and along with providing you with that sort of machine-assisted prioritization, we want to enable a new workflow where instead of you showing up and saying, and looking at just this long table or this wide table and thinking, well, where do I even start? Instead, you can start with this visual overview. You can see features that might be insights, but also you can see views that might be valuable views. So this radar plot seems to show a very different pattern for the compilation album types versus the album and single album types. This is some Spotify data from one of, immortalized from one of our data engineers. So he'll be forever remembered as the Data Prism demo Spotify data guy. So we've got some interesting responses from Data Prism that are around insight generation. That's great. This is super exciting to me. As a data visualization person, this is not a chart I would have thought of to use here, and not something I would have thought would show such a distinct and interesting pattern. The long tail bar chart shows some interesting stuff about the top end, clearly, of the of whatever this distribution is, which is apparently the date that they were added. You've got some outliers over the box plot. You've got some very interesting stuff going on in this scatter plot if we look at key confidence versus annotated, so on and so forth. But what I really like about this is that there's a lot of good results, and then there's one really bad result, right? It's whatever this is. Whatever this is, the correlation is so strong that it must be, you know, almost the same data set. But what we want to enable isn't just automatic insight generation and automatic summarization, visual summarization of data sets. What we also want to enable is we want to remind people of the functionality within the tool. And we want to let them know, hey, we have these graduated symbol plots that maybe could be valuable in your exploration. So what I like about this is the idea that somebody's looking through this, they're seeing all these insights, they see this and they think, well, this isn't very good. But then what they realize is, hold on a second, maybe this could be, because I know how this data set looks. And I know that really what we should be using here is we should be using this for the x-axis, and this for the y-axis, and this for the circle size, or something like that. And they go through and they enable a bunch of features on this. And they create a chart because Data Prism inspired them to create the chart. Now, I'm not an expert in analyzing acoustic data, so I didn't come up with such a great chart at the end of that. But earlier on, I did sort of manage to find a rather interesting distribution of this album compilation single based on tempo and fade out. And then, you know, I deployed these histograms and everything like this. The idea being that I didn't show up and have in mind using this chart. I used this chart because I was reminded of it, because the tool reminded me of it. And this is something I think we're going to think of more and more as we have more automated assistants, you know, the chat GPTs of the world and everything else, which is that it's not just there to answer the questions for you. It's also there to provide you with opportunities, to remind you of approaches that you might use. And so that's how we designed Data Prism, was very much with that workflow in mind.
I think that's an interesting point, because as an expert, you're able to kind of get your memory triggered, or like be inspired to create different charts. And it's similar for me as a beginner at data visualization. I get to see all of these different options, and maybe some of them are charts that I never have even heard of, and they end up being interesting. So it's a good tool for both people who know what they're doing and people like me who are just starting to learn.
And that's very much actually a higher order principle that I think is really exciting about true automatic data visualization. So what I don't like is when people advertise chart functionality as automatic. And really all they mean is, like I said, I drag a datetime column in, it gives me a line chart. I drag a metric in, it gives me a bar chart. I drag 2 metrics in, it gives me a scatter plot. I drag a category in, it either automatically facets it or puts some color on it. Like, to me, that's a nice UI pattern that people like. But what that actually does, Noel, is the opposite of what you're talking about, right? Because what that does is it reinforces to you, if there are 2 metrics, it's a scatter plot. And as we've seen throughout this notebook, if I have 2 metrics, there's a lot of different ways I could look at that. And what's effective depends on the data, the question, and also the audience. And so, one of the principles I've long beat the drum about is that we live in an attention economy. And so whenever you're making your reports or you're making some kind of presentation and you're putting bar charts in front of people, those bar charts are competing with all the other information displays that they have to see in their day-to-day life. And so sometimes using a novel display is valuable simply because it's novel. So to enable that, to build up the data visualization literacy of the person creating the information displays, to build up the data visualization literacy of their collaborators and stakeholders, I think that's valuable across an organization and not just in an individual moment trying to describe a pattern in data or find an insight.
Yeah, totally.
So what's kind of cool about Data Prism, I'm going to jump into, unless there's any questions, of course, interrupt me if there are any questions. I'm staring at a notebook, so I never know if there's any questions coming in. Data Prism, as
we do have a
above.
question. Okay. A question came in. What's an example? What's an example of a chart type that few users discover on their own, but Data Prism often suggests? For example, would it suggest a hive plot for a large, complex network data set?
That's interesting. Currently, it does not suggest a hive plot for a large, complex network data set, but that would be something to put in there. That's a good question. I think for regular tabular data, I see the radar plot more than I expect to. And I see the radar plot just like we did with the Shopify data. I've already sort of gotten out of that, but let's go see if we can go back. We can go back. It's automatic. I see the radar plot more than I expect to, and I see the radar plot in a way that's valuable more than I expect to. I'm kind of surprised that, like, this to me is shocking. I don't think of the radar plot as like a chart that I'm going to deploy very much. I consider myself an expert, so I almost said I don't think of a radar chart as a good chart, which of course goes against everything I was just saying, which is that the chart depends on the audience and everything. So we see that a lot, and it's more useful than I would have thought. We're actually going to get into some of these. The tree map also is something, but I think the tree map's common enough that it's actually not something that's going to surprise folks. But it's a good question because we're going to get into these sort of special data cases. So one of the things that Data Prism does, along with checking the viability of charts, is it also tries to see if the data that you have, the tabular data that you have, is amenable to some of the stranger data visualization modes. So some of the strange is probably not the right word, some of the less familiar ones. So if I go over to Data Prism over here, and I just look at this data set, which is a data set that shows stock data for Apple. It's the open and close and the high and the low and the volume. And what it shows kind of a boring adjusted close to close scatter plot. It shows a connected scatter plot, which actually, at least tells you connected scatter plots exist, which is nice. It'll give you an area chart depending on what kind of data you're looking at. Sometimes you'll get an area chart. Sometimes you'll get a line chart. Scatter plot of open volume, which is nice. And then, the now ubiquitous parallel coordinate system, which, parallel coordinates also is suggested a lot. And that's not something folks are familiar with, but I'm hoping folks get more familiar with, especially the way that we've designed parallel coordinates, which actually combines parallel sets with parallel coordinates. But what's nice about this is if I go over here and configure this and explicitly say, hey, I'm really interested in open, high, low, close, and date, right? The opening price of a stock, the intraday high, the intraday low, the closing price of the stock, and the date of the whatever the ticker value is. And I look at, and I search, ask Data Prism about that. It shows me an area chart of it, which is kind of cool and bad. This would not be something you want to put in front of people. But it correctly identifies that this data has a high and a low and an open and closed pattern that's amenable to a candlestick chart. And so what's cool about this is that sometimes you'll find out that the data you have is actually, it's Likert-like data, right? It's candlestick-like data. And that's kind of fun. Like the Likert chart is another one that shows up sometimes, a survey chart that tries to tell you survey results, typically with Likert scale style data. It's candlestick chart. I love the fact that it sees that this is candlestick-like data and gives you a candlestick chart. If you have
on that front, real quick, Elijah, yeah. So just kind of like ties in that last question and this last example here, right? You mentioned at the start of this, there are 40 plus, data visualization types that are currently supported within Notable within DEX. How is Data Prism's approach here of trying to balance like showing people visualizations that they are familiar with, like bar charts and scatter plots, but also kind of getting this example here, what is the best approach here to kind of introducing these new chart types, these more advanced chart types, and is there any special kind of weighting under the hood, or how is the kind of philosophical approach of Data Prism trying to address that balance?
Yeah, I mean, what we try to do is we try to pair familiar with unfamiliar. We preference charts that are in certain domains. So you'll see that with geographic data, with lat-long data. Like if we see lat-long data, we're going to give you a tile map. We want to make sure you get a tile map out of that. If we see countries, we're going to give you a choropleth map. And currently, if we see US states, we're going to give you a US level choropleth map. Eventually, we'll add more choropleths to that. But that starts to break down a little bit when we get to more complex charts. So it's something like candlestick chart. If we got candlestick-like data, and there's a good chance that we've got somebody who's analyzing stock data, and we want to get that candlestick chart in front of them. But maybe it wasn't stock data, and maybe they were more interested in a sort of more traditional display. So we try to preference familiarity. We've tried to evaluate those 43 different chart modes and some of the permutations of them based on familiarity. And we also, though, when it comes to larger reports, we've tried to introduce other charts, more novel charts, just because we think that that's going to Noel's point, it's going to empower you and make you consider other approaches that might be valuable to your data. So along with the stock data, this is fun because, I should probably show you the data first before I jump into it. This is what I've called path string data. It's a comma delimited series of steps. So in this one, in this case, the number of times people have gone on different kinds of their dating pattern. So if you have path string data, and you drop it into Data Prism, that's interesting. It'll give you a big number back. I think I think what happened was I told it not to. It'll give you a combined bar chart of we saw those steps. Hey, look, this is the most common path by far, which you could have easily read because it's literally like a 6-line, 6-row spreadsheet, but it'll show the same over here in a tree map. But then also it will split that path up and give you a funnel. It'll show you actually the steps in those paths aggregated, and it'll show it to you in a couple of different ways apparently, because there's a couple of different ways you can look at it here. If we have, like I was saying before, if we have some lat-long data like we do with the New York City squirrel census, then sure enough you can see your squirrels by shift, apparently, because squirrels punch in and punch out like the old Looney Tunes cartoons, along with way too much squirrel data. Another thing you'll see a lot, this is interesting to me as a data visualization person, you see a lot of token clouds or word clouds. So basically, words where the magnitude is encoded on the size of the word or the sentence or the token. And what's interesting to me about that, from a data visualization perspective, is that in data visualization, most people hate word clouds. It's actually softened a bit. For a while there, everybody thought they were right up there with pie charts. And really, word clouds are interesting because they are suitable for a very ugly part of the real data world, which is these high cardinality dimensions. That what else can you do with them but show a bit of their magnitude and show you what they are. So see word clouds a bit, a lot of histograms, of course, but that's Data Prism. Love for you to make a notebook. I'd love for you to go and turn it on and tell me how wonderful it was, or, you know, if in the extremely unlikely event that you run into any issues, you let me know what the issues are and I can try to work it out. But the idea here is that, you know, automatic data visualization or any automatic tool isn't about replacing you or replacing an expert. If you're in leadership, it's not about replacing all of your analysts. It's about supplementing and empowering them. It's about creating better workflows, more modern workflows that allow you to get at the important things in your data. So hopefully you found it useful, and hopefully you'll play with Data Prism and have fun with it.
Perfect. Thank you. And just to recap, right, as what Elijah said, we'd love for you to kind of go and try this out. So you can sign up on our website if you don't have an account yet. And like I said, we just launched this week. And so we're really looking forward to users' feedback as they start playing with their own data sets and you know, discovering which suggestions they really like and which suggestions that maybe they want some improvements on. So please get in touch with us, and we'd love to hear from you. So with that, any last questions here from the users or from Noel? Anyone else? I think we're good. I think we're also at time, which is wonderful. Oh, question came in. How do you see this process being used in a workflow, or do you seeing this being used along the path?
Oh, by workflow, I'm assuming like an automated workflow. That's what I'm guessing. If we drop this into an actual like a scheduled notebook or something like that, I think that there is functionality in Dex to get the Dex settings out of Dex as Python code. So you could very much automate this, pull the settings out, do an analysis. You could do your own. You could have your workflow in the middle. The other possibility, depending on how people mean in a workflow, is you could have a different kind of automatic report for folks. You know, every Monday I get a report. It's a PDF and it has exactly the same charts telling me what happened last week. Well, that's maybe instead what it should be is it should be a report that sometimes those charts change depending on the shape of the data. And maybe that's going to be more insightful. Maybe that's going to be more engaging with your audience. So that to me is very exciting, right? Like a weekly automated report that permutes based on the shape of the data. That to me sounds pretty radical and valuable. I'd love to hear if somebody tries that out. So there's a couple of ways that I could see this fitting into workflows.
And certainly, like on the user workflow, I totally agree with what Noel said earlier, right? As being, someone who myself is kind of, new to some of these advanced data visualization types, I think what I find so exciting and so refreshing about Data Prism is that when I have a data set, I can look at just, quickly see a variety of different visualization types that are recommended for that data set, knowing that they're any individual one of them is not going to be perfect to what I want to get out of it. But as Elijah showed today, I can zoom in on that. I can change what was the x-axis, the y-axis, or what field we conditionally formatted on. But just seeing an example of that visualization type applied to my data takes me further down the path to actually getting to the the exact visualization that I want and the exact insights that I want. And so I see it in the kind of in the EDA sense as being enormously helpful for kind of getting that first step of how do I choose what could potentially be the best visualization for that data type.
I agree. I think from the modern, from that sense of workflow, I think this is the modern workflow. I think we're all seeing it with ChatGPT and everything else. Is that the modern workflow is going to be a lot of send my automatic assistants out to go and make a bunch of stuff, and then I discern and edit and refine. So this, I just think fits into where we're all going with everything, it seems like.
Perfect. And with that, we can wrap it up. So thank you everyone again for joining. Thank you, Elijah and Noel, for being here for the live stream. And we will be back for Data Viz Fridays, actually on Fridays in the future. So we'll post on LinkedIn and Twitter and everywhere else when our next updates are. But they will be on Fridays. So thank you again for joining us for this special one, and hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, folks.